Good morning, boys and girls. This is take two of Barbarian Invaders, Chapter 40 of A Child's History of the World. So, it is time for Rome to fall. It has been the big dog for far too long. And the Roman Empire has had its day. It's risen as high as it can. And it was Rome's turn to be conquered. But it's you're not going to guess who the people that do the conquering. For centuries, there had been Germanic tribes living on the northern borders of the Roman Empire. Every now and then, they tried to cross over the border into Rome, and Romans had to be constantly fighting them to keep them back from where they belonged. Julius Caesar had fought with them, Marcus Aurelius, and even Constantine that we just talked about. The Romans called these people barbarians, which is what they called anyone who was not Roman. The Romans believed that all barbarians were fierce and warlike. Now, my kitty cat, Snowflake, who photobombed my video yesterday, was acting barbaric yesterday because she had a mouse and she brought it on the porch and she kept letting it go and then catching it again and batting it about and throwing it up in the air, and she was having a good time. But she was torturing that poor thing. She was being a barbarian. And then when she finished and he wouldn't run anymore, she ate him, tail and all. She was barbaric. Anyway, so that word means a lot worse than it used to. So many of these Germanic people had blonde hair and blue eyes. The Greeks and Romans and other people who lived around the Mediterranean Sea had dark hair and dark eyes. They were called brunettes. Although some of the Germanic peoples had moved into the Roman Empire, many lived in sparsely populated areas, not in the cities, and they lived in huts made of wood, sometimes branches woven together like a basket. The women raised the vegetables and took care of the cows and the horses, and the men did the hunting and the fighting, and blacksmithing. So blacksmithing was very important, for the blacksmith made the swords and the spears with which they fought and tools with which they worked. That's why the name Smith was so honored among them. And if your last name is Smith, or if you know someone whose last name is Smith, like Miss Lynn Smith, our art teacher, probably descended from one of these Germanic tribes. And wouldn't you know, Miss Smith has blonde hair and blue eyes. So there was a famous blacksmith, the Anglo-Saxon Wayland Smith. He was known in Old Norse mythology as Volander. He's a heroic blacksmith in Germanic mythology. He forged beautiful gold rings set with wonderful gems. He was captured by a king who cruelly cut his hamstring muscle so he couldn't go anywhere, and imprisoned him on an island. But Volander eventually had his revenge because he killed the king's sons and created this. This is a very old piece of art from Wayland. It's got the king's daughter to the left and his dead sons hidden to the right. And he can be seen as the eagle trying to fly away. So I'll show you that. So that's very old. When the men went to battle, they wore the heads of animals they had killed, an ox's head, horns and all, or the head of a wolf or a bear or a fox. And this was to make themselves look fierce and to frighten the enemy. I'm going to show you this picture because this shows the Germanic tribes of the time. Now, when I say Germanic tribes, you've heard of the Vikings. So there were the Goths, the Franks, the Vandals, the Huns, and the Anglo-Saxons. So those are the Germanic tribes, and some of them, they're not all Germanic tribes, but here's the map of those. And see, this is Europe. And this is kind of right at the end of the Roman Empire. The Germanic tribes are getting ready to kind of take over. So bravery was the chief thing that men thought good. A man might lie, he might steal, he might commit murder, but if he was a brave warrior, well, he was called a good man. The Germanic tribes did not have a king. They elected a chief. And of course, they always chose the man who was the bravest and the strongest. But he could not make his son ruler after him. So he was more like a president than a king. These northern people had an entirely different set of gods and goddesses from those of Greece and Rome. So Greece and Rome, we talked about, Jupiter and Venus and Mercury, and before them we had some of the Greek gods, Apollo and all of those gods, Hephaestus and help me out, Jesse. Zeus and Hera and all those wonderful, interesting gods and goddesses. So the German tribes had a different set of gods and goddesses, and their chief god, of course, was the god of war, and they called him Woden. Now they call him Odin, but it started Woden with a W. And he was also the god of the sky. And he was like the two Greek gods, Zeus and Ares, kind of put together. Woden was supposed to live in a wonderful palace in the sky called Valhalla. And many tales are told of the wonderful things he did and the adventures he had. Now, our day, Wednesday, that we have, comes from Woden. It was Woden's day. And so a lot of times, we say, well, why is there a letter D in Wednesday? That makes no sense because we don't even pronounce the D. But it's because Wednesday comes from Woden. See, there's the D. That's why we still have a D in our day of the week, Wednesday. Now, after Woden is someone that I'm sure most of you have heard of. That is Thor. Thor was the next most important god. He was the god of thunder and lightning, and he carried a hammer with which he fought great giants who lived in the far-off cold lands, and they were called ice giants or frost giants. And so here's Thor. Now I want to show you some pictures, of course. I'll try not to show you Chris Helmsworth, though that's my kind of Thor. Did I say that out loud? Okay, let me get to what I'm looking for. Well, this is another picture of Smith Wayland, another piece of artwork from him. And then we have Woden, or Odin. Looks pretty fierce, huh? Giving you lots of things to draw today. So he was the god of war, the Norse god of war. And then, of course, we want to have, trying to find Thor. Now, Thor's Day is where we get our Thursday from. Thor's Day, so we get Thursday from that. And as the son of Odin, king of the Norse gods, Thor was going to inherit Asgard. And this is, we could really get into this, but I'm trying to not get into movies. Now, here's a picture of a painting, actually, of Thor fighting the giants. And Thor. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I could tell you about Thor, but I won't. So he carried a hammer, and there was another god called Tiu, and from his name, Tuesday, we get our Tuesday. And then finally, Freya, from whom we get Friday. And Freya, she was like kind of like a Norse goddess. And I'll get you some images of that in a second. But we get Friday from Freya. So 4 out of 7 of our days of the week are named after Germanic gods, in spite of the fact that none of us believe in them, but we have, used. Now here's a picture of Freya. That's one picture of her. And then could probably show you some. They also have her like being a warrior princess kind of thing. Anyway, this is a Germanic warrior. So this is what we think when you think of these Germanic tribes. Look at this guy, okay? This is kind of what they would look like, you know, with their helmets of animal head. It looks like, I don't know, maybe a cow's horns on top. Of the other 3 days of the week, Sunday and Monday, of course, are named after the sun and moon, and Saturday is named after the Roman god Saturn. So about the year 400, these northern neighbors were becoming particularly troublesome to the Romans, and they began to push their way down into the northern part of the Roman Empire. And after a few years, the Romans could not hold them back any longer. So they kind of invaded. 2 of the Germanic tribes went over into Britain, and the Romans who were living there, man, they found it wisest just to get out. They just let them have it. So the country, the tribes who settled there in Britain were known as Angles and the Saxons. So the country came to be called the land of the Angles, or for short, Angle land. And that, let me show you, Angle land ended up being, if you haven't figured it out already, after saying that a whole bunch of times, it ended up becoming Angland. England. So, it is what we call the country today. The people of England are still known by the full name Anglo-Saxons, and this is the name by which we call anyone descended from the tribes of Angles and Saxons who settled in Britain about 400 AD. So I have that ancestry in my background, Anglo-Saxon. Another tribe called the Vandals went into Gaul. Now, Gaul is where France is today. If I can get my map. Dun, da, da. So here's Italy, here's Spain, here's England, and this is what they called Gaul. But it is today France. You see that? Then they kept on down into Spain. They were stealing, smashing, burning, and destroying, and they crossed over by boats to North Africa. They damaged or destroyed everything they came upon. So today, when anyone damages or destroys property wickedly, we call them a vandal, because the tribes were the Vandals. If you cut up your desk, tear your book, scratch names on walls in bathrooms or fences, you too are going to be called a vandal. You do not need to vandalize anything. A tribe called the Franks followed the Vandals into Gaul, and that's where they stayed, and the Franks gave the name France to the country, which still is called France today. The people north of Italy were the Goths. They had a leader by the name of Alaric. Now, Alaric and his Goths crossed over the mountains into Italy, and they robbed or destroyed everything of value they could lay their hands on. They then returned, entered Rome, and they carried away whatever they wanted, and the Romans could not stop them. So all these Germanic tribes overran Rome and basically took everything of value. But the worst was yet to come. And we're going to talk about that next time. Have a good day.